Welcome everyone to our next episode of the Under the Spell podcast series, where we're going to be unpacking the book, The Spell, and I'm very excited because today we have Tim Richman, the publisher and editor of The Spell, someone who knows the book more intricately than everyone else besides the two writers, I guess. So Tim, a pleasure to be here and be able to talk about your journey working on The Spell with David and Robin.
Yes, Steve, thanks very much for having me. It's been quite a journey, so looking forward to chatting about it.
But let's jump right into that journey, Tim, because it's I know this book was a long time coming for David. It has changed forms, it's mutated, it's evolved, and I'm sure you going along that journey has been both interesting and rewarding. Take us through a little bit of from the very first conversation to the point we are now, where the book is printed and getting onto shelves.
Well, we'd probably have to go back about 5 years to the first book. So David's first book, which was published through Burnett Media, was The End of Money. David and Robin and Christian then. And I would say then second book was the following year, which was The Age of Menace, which then became Unequal. And around about then, I'm thinking this is now 2022, so solid 3 years plus ago, David mentioned he wanted to do a book on climate change. A book on climate change. Okay, what could possibly go wrong? Climate change, from a publisher's perspective, it's a difficult topic. There are lots of books on climate change, and at the same time, they're very polarizing. So you're essentially either for climate change or against climate change. So in the last 3 years, David and Robin have done other books, one which was more work-related, more sort of industry-related, which was Why Banks Fail, which was a great book, but quite specific and in some senses an easy book. It was essentially, David's work history. And then there was the memoir project as well, but The Spell's been going on in the background. And every few months, or whenever I checked in with David, he'd let me know that something was up on The Spell, or that they've done, 20,000 extra words. And next thing I hear it's at 200,000 words. So 200,000 words is a lot, and we knew that it was never going to end up at that length. But I kept sort of the more words, the slightly more concerned I was, because David and Robin's ability, I would say, or one of their key abilities, is to have a readable, page-turning book, a complex topic which you can read, it's accessible, you want to turn the pages rather than, yawns and go to sleep. But 200,000 words is a push, and you're going to have a book like this thick. Anyway, we were very clear about me not getting involved in the content originally, so that when it finally landed on my desk, I could see the wood for the trees. So the editor's role is, one of the roles is to do a strategic assessment, at a draft level. And I didn't want to be tainted by knowing certain things along the way. What I did know was that the idea of a climate change book had changed. I knew the title was The Spell, and it was sort of no longer about climate change. But climate change was going to be in the book. And essentially now that I've edited the book and had obviously lots of conversations with David and Robin, is what they found, or what I think they found, was that the topic was too polarized and too much of a hot potato to really, it was too much of a rabbit hole to get down into. And what was more interesting for them was understanding why people have certain attitudes towards a particular narrative or particular story. And in that case, it was the climate change narrative. So, and this is the point, is the climate change is a story that is told. And depending on how you listen to the story or interpret the story, you're going to have a different perspective on climate change. So that's when I read the manuscript and basically understood that is how the original book on climate change had turned into what is now The Spell, I loved it. It's always this this moment of when an author you haven't published before sends through a manuscript, there's no pressure, because you can like it or not like it, and if you don't like it, you can say it's not for us, and potentially good luck elsewhere. But in David's case, he's a Burnett Media author. I've got to read his manuscript, so it's important that it's good. And this one was wonderful. It was different to the previous books in certain ways, but I see it as an evolution of his own storytelling and Robin's storytelling ability, in that the book is even more complex than the original books in what it covers. It's 2,500 years of Western civilization essentially, but it's even more readable.
And I'm sure, you get tons of manuscripts hitting your desk, and to have one land on your desk that gives you that aha moment that you're talking about, that you feel like we're onto something. That must be quite a rewarding moment for you as a publisher who's worked with David and Robin for quite some time. How has the book progressed from that stage manuscript to where it actually went to the print?
Well, first thing to say is that with a little bit more experience, you actually have fewer manuscripts landing on your desk because you can filter them out further in advance. You can't filter out one of your existing author's manuscripts. You're obliged to read them. So David's first book, The End of Many, David and Robin's first book, that book had a great way of explaining a very complex topic to the layman. The Age of Menace, the second book, was similar in that you had complex topics which gave you which were explained in a way that you had an understanding of how the world was. In each case, there were certain areas that we needed to work on because we felt the reader needed something more out of the manuscript. For The Spell, the key was the conclusion. This is the thing that we've worked the hardest on. It's understanding what is the spell. And so if I get back to the journey of the book from 3 years ago to today, where David started a book on climate change and he ended up doing a book called The Spell, which was quite different to the original intention that he and Robin had. And so, in terms of the edit, working out exactly that definition of what the spell was the key. Sort of, what is this thing? And now, originally I would say the conclusion was not satisfying enough. It was too esoteric. And we've spent the entire edit working out with this question at the end. How are we ending this? How are we wrapping it up? How are we concluding it? And I think that the current conclusion, I have to say, is aha. It's good.
Well, it's certainly some encouragement for someone to get to the end of the book.
It's a long read. It's a book with incredible scope. There's a lot to it. There are lots of threads, lots of disparate threads, and they come together, and now the end is satisfying. And I will say this: it's a book. It's a multidisciplinarian book. It's got psychology. It's got philosophy. It's got 2,500 years of philosophy. It's got science. It's got maths, finance, economics. But it's all put together and pulled together in such a way that by your final page, there's a small little bit of self-help. There's about a paragraph of self-help, in my opinion. I haven't actually even told David that this is my opinion, and it's brilliant. It's that little insight for me is worth getting right to the end of the book for.
And Tim, you touch on the diversity of content in this book, and it really is. It's incredible how the authors have been able to take such a varied scope and pull it into a single book that has a golden thread that allows you to have a conclusion like that. You've worked closely with Robin and David for quite some time, and I think part of what makes your relationship work is there are very few people on the same intellectual level as David, with the way that he thinks and he processes information, and you can hold your own against someone like him, which I think is very important to have that backwards and forwards between the two. But in your opinion, what qualifies, even though they're both very smart, David and Robin to be writing a book such as this?
That's a great question, and it's an interesting question within publishing today, and I would say in politics and science today is, you've got this, what is essentially an expert problem, and there's so much data and information in the world these days that to be an expert in something, you really have to narrow down your focus. So how are you qualified to write a book that encompasses 2,500 years or more of Western philosophy, plus hundreds of years of psychology, modern science, even I think there's history, economics, finance, linguistics. I'm barely touching the surface here. So it's a great question. So you obviously have to have somebody who's a multidisciplinarian. And that's David. This is David. I mean, this is one portion of his library.
Yes.
And he's probably the most well-read author that I've ever dealt with. And I've dealt with a lot of authors. I've got authors who are absolutely brilliant in an area, maybe in two areas. But David's breadth of knowledge is sort of unsurpassed in my experience, I would say. So he's strategic. And he can, he has to work out where he's going, which is what I was saying. It's been a long journey of working out actually what they've been trying to say. But he couldn't do it without Robin. Robin brings the capacity of in-depth research.
Yes.
It's her skill, and she's got the ability and the means and timing to do it, so that they can go and do these deep dives into all these disciplines. And then, there are multiple deep dives that didn't make it into the book. And then we have to work together about what stays in and what goes out. And I would say that their sort of writing superpower is the collaboration between the two of them.
Yes.
Where you've got David's breadth of knowledge and Robin's skill and ability to dive deep into the research.
So, Tim, who do you think is the right person to be reading this book? Who would you kind of consider the target audience, considering all of the different types of content that are in it, and as kind of general storytelling that it takes the reader through?
I'm going to give you a couple of answers here.
Okay.
The ideal reader for this book is anybody who enjoys modern nonfiction. Simple as that. But if we're going to go a little bit deeper, I would say that the reader who is going to get so much out of this book is somebody young, so I'm talking age 18, maybe to 30, who is smart, who's interested in the world, and who needs some context of how we are where we are today. So if you're a student and you're specializing in psychology, but want to know how psychology fits in with economics and finance and history and philosophy, this book is key.
Yeah.
And when I say psychology, it could be any of those others. Just swap out the disciplines. So I would say, every 10 or 15 years, a book comes along that is broad in scope and helps explain to a younger generation how the world works. I would say previously you had Sapiens. When I was younger, I read a book by Jacques Bazoun called From Dawn to Decadence, about 500 years of Western civilization. And it's the type of book that just makes you understand where we are in the world today. And I believe that this book, The Spell, is a similar book.
Yeah. And you mentioned students, but I think it's almost students of life as well.
Yes.
People who just have a yearning for new information, new perspectives, new way of seeing everyday dilemmas and issues. And it really does give a refreshing lens for someone who is inclined.
Yes. As I said, anyone who enjoys nonfiction should be reading this. And I mean, even fiction, because one of the brilliant skills in the book is how all these classic fictional stories, whether it's novels, comic books, movies, are sort of bound or woven into what is a nonfiction book. And yeah, I mean, you don't have to be 18. You can be 80 to enjoy this book.
Yeah.
But just for me personally, I think sort of that if you're in those formative years, 18 to 25 or 30, this is the type of book that you should be reading. But yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit older than 30, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And I, we all have our biases, and I'm glad I loved it, but I genuinely did. And I consider myself relatively well read, but it gave me new perspectives on topics that I know intimately, as well as certain topics that I have far less knowledge on. So for me, it was a double pleasure. It was different perspectives on things I knew, and then new information on topics that I didn't know so well.
And I think the one thing that I felt personally challenged by is how revealing it was about our biases and as individuals, but as society, and you go through all these stories in history, and you see there are a couple of different versions to the truth of a lot of these stories, and we are in a very polarized world. There are multiple narratives going on. You look at two different headlines of two different newspapers, and you swear it's two different stories, but it's on the same thing. How do you, as an editor, help guide the creative process in writing a book like this, where you want to try and be objective, you want to try and maintain a single voice or point of view, and how do you manage it with authors such as David and Robin?
That's a great question, and I mean it gets to the very heart of the book. Is at the heart of the book is this idea that the world cannot be interpreted objectively. It's just impossible. There are too many perspectives, and we all see it in different ways, and the story is told in different ways. So how do we edit it to try and be objective, or to present? I'll rephrase it slightly. It's how do we present the book so that it can be consumed or read or interpreted by the reader in the best possible way, or in the most likely possible way. One of the technical challenges, for instance, is there are certain topics, and climate change is the obvious one, which are red flags. And so how you deal with them, you have to be very careful that you are in a relatively neutral space. Other examples that came up in the book were the George Floyd race riots in 2020, the origins of COVID story, similar time. You know, a certain reader the hackles just rise just with those topics being mentioned. So then how do we discuss them? So we looked at certain potentially polarizing or subjects that have been polarized very closely to see how we could manage them as neutrally as possible, but without giving away the end of the book. You know, the conclusion is that we all have biases and we all have predilections and preconceptions, and you know, we need to be aware of these things. And the authors, you know, they have the disclaimer at some point that, you know, they have their own. But as the editor, the role is to try and bring it to as neutral a perspective as possible, which is ironic given the topic.
And I think that's what this book does so well, is it's found a way to share a lot of different stories, a lot of different points of view and perspectives in a way that helps you to think a little bit more critically about the world and about your perception of the world. And I felt forced to face some of my own biases and preconceptions as a result of it, and almost felt more equipped to do so after reading this book. Do you think that's part of the purpose of this book?
I think so, and I think the interesting question, maybe for a further discussion with David and Robin, would be if that was their intention to start, or if they subconsciously ended up at this point. And you know, a lot of the messaging in the book is that these narratives that we tell they aren't puppet masters. You know, we live in this age of conspiracy theories. Everything's a conspiracy. You know, if you spend any time online, which I don't recommend to anyone, you know, everything becomes explained by, you know, whether it's the Illuminati or this or that. And that is this human nature to tell stories. One of the main points that David and Robin were trying to make was that the narratives that we tell each other today that sort of guide society in different directions, and they sort of fight and merge with each other, they're mostly developed subconsciously over time. You know, there aren't these puppet masters manipulating things. We live in this age of conspiracy theories, where conspiracy theories are a dime a dozen, especially online. And that's humans trying to make sense of the world. But one of the big ahas for me out of this book was just the understanding that that's not the case. You know, there aren't people manipulating intently, or with direct intent rather. It's just the way things have gone. Often you can have these narratives that end up quite disastrously, whether it's, you know, Western banks propping up third world authoritarian dictatorships, and the original intention was a good one, you know, but over time it's evolved, you know, for certain reasons in certain ways. And, you know, getting back to David and Robin's original intention, I don't think they could tell you that that is what they were trying to convey. But they have, I think, come up with a final manuscript, which does give fresh perspectives. And, as a reader, I can genuinely say that I can look at the world slightly differently with better understandings as a result of the book.
And on fresh perspectives, I feel like it's hard to surprise you these days with everything that you've read, and you're very attuned to what's happening in the world. Are there certain things that you felt that you learnt and gained a new insight working with David and Robin on this book?
Yeah, plenty. I would say that within certain topics, there was just interesting information. And I'm that type of reader personally, where if I read something, an area of any content that is of interest to me, and I learn more about it, that's great. There's a lot of that in this book.
Yeah.
So you're going to find all sorts of topics that you read and go, that's cool, or depending on who you are. But beyond that, it's getting to this point of what we're mentioning, is this ability to almost look at the stories from a meta perspective, where you are looking down at the storytelling, and it gives you, I would say, even like a sense of peace to be able to assess the way the world works from a slightly elevated or out of the way perspective, rather than being immersed in it where you lose control. It's immersed in the chaos and struggling, which is something that you see so much these days, especially online. The book doesn't go into the way social media essentially trolls everyone and pulls people into their specific outrage narrative. But I mean, that's the next step. I mean, what is presented in the book is exactly why that business model, that big tech business model, the outrage model, works.
Absolutely. And we've spoken a bit about biases. So I'll ask you to try and answer this question without your own biases. But if you had to recommend this book to someone in a sentence or two, how would you set it up? How would you pitch it?
Understand the world today. It's not even a sentence. It doesn't even have a verb. It does have a verb.
It's catchy though.
Yeah. I would, let me try and sort of enhance on that slightly. Understand why we tell each other the stories we tell each other, and why you follow or listen to the stories that you listen to. And in doing that, you may find that the world is easier to navigate.
Well, Tim, it's been a pleasure chatting to you about the book. Great to hear a behind the scenes perspective of the journey that the writers have been on, and to get to better understand the process of publishing a book like this. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here and to be able to share some of the points about the spell.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Great.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Tim.